Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of CGSP Reports focusing on COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. This event is coming at a very exciting time against the backdrop of Donald Trump's election and China's position against debt discussions at the Conference of Parties and the COP29's executive Elnur Sultanov discussing fossil fuel deals, as reported by the BBC. I am joined by my compatriot Fred Njehu, the Pan African political strategist at Greenpeace Africa. Njehu is an international trade and economic governance, climate change negotiator, and an energy access policy and researcher. Welcome, Njehu.
Thank you for having me.
It is a wonderful day to be with you and to see what is happening. You're in Baku. I think I looked at the weather a few days ago and it was warm, so you must be enjoying while we are freezing here in Nairobi. But looking at what is happening and what I have just mentioned about Trump's election, China's position and the executive being caught in this discussion. It was an undercover report by the BBC. How does China's stance against debt discussions at COP29 impact our Africa China financial relationships, especially in light of Africa's dependency on foreign loans for climate and infrastructure projects?
Yeah, thank you for having me once again. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I'm joining you from Baku. So the Chinese delegation here in Baku, have been very progressive in supporting the developing countries' position around the climate finance. And according to the Paris Agreement, Article 9, it's very elaborate that, developed countries should provide, financing to developing countries to tackle the climate crisis or for the climate action in their countries. So the solidarity that is built, with the African negotiators and also the Chinese colleagues, should actually be pushing towards, ensuring that there is more finances, but most importantly, there is an agreement on the new collective and quantified goal on climate finance going into the next couple of days. So that's important. And on your question around the relationship between China and Africa, so definitely, Africa is a recipient of a lot of international financial assistance from China and also the other countries. And so this means that, the more the money we get as the African continent to address both the climate action and development needs and also the socioeconomic well-being of our citizens, the better we are positioned as a continent.
Nice. And this morning actually, the Chinese premier said that China has provided and mobilized $24.5 billion to assist developing countries in tackling climate change. So it's very interesting that these conversations around numbers are now becoming more visible, and China is becoming more forthright. And I think also this puts China in a place whereby if the US kind of decides we are not in this, it could be like the leader in climate conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese contribution to towards the continent has been very significant over the last few decades. That's no doubt. And, with the shifting geopolitics, and with the Trump administration coming on board, of course, it's likely to alter the outcome. But we are keeping our eyes on the ball, and we are very optimistic that, what the US will commit, that the next administration would actually not water it down. In terms of the commitment, if you look at the contributions, from the European Union and other, Western countries, it has been, rising, but then again, it's not significant. And that's where, they are talking about new contributor base, having more countries contribute to the to the climate finance and the new goal having new contributors. And the debate here is, are they going to contribute as as on a voluntary basis, or will it necessitate a negotiation where the format of payment is not just mandatory, but it's not just voluntary, but mandatory. So that's a discussion that you're likely to see in the next coming days. It's not yet finalized, so there is a new text
Yeah.
on the new goal, and different countries have put down different proposals. So the question here would be, will China, step up to be either a voluntary contributor to the goal, or will it, step back? For me, I see it
All right.
from an angle of two things. One, high emitting countries have been, blamed, for the high emissions globally, and we are asking, the higher the polluters, the more they should pay for the climate finance. So countries
Yeah.
have to, show that political will, and as Greenpeace, we've been calling for polluters to pay for the losses and damages, and to contribute to the financial kitty. So that's very significant. But political will drive the outcome of the negotiations. How leaders are able to strike a consensus on a, a new goal, number one, a new contributors, and how contributions will be made. But most importantly, having different segments of the goal being part of the final outcome, and different components. I mean, having sub goals on mitigation, sub goals on adaptation, and also pushing for the inclusion of loss and damage as a sub goal to the grant, new collective of quantified goal of finance. So that's very significant. Yeah.
All right. And we know from Donald Trump's first term that he is a climate skeptic. And this skepticism, when you look at it, and probably from Trump's first term, how do you think that his policies will influence Africa-China partnerships on renewable energy and also climate adaptation projects?
Yeah, even during the Trump administration, there was quite a lot of backlash in terms of how they perceive the climate negotiations. They threatened to pull out. Of course, pulling out of the Paris Agreement is complete. It's a complex process in the U.S. Because, of course, the Congress have to go through a very elaborate and long legal process to do that. Of course, there is a likely scenario it's going to happen, or unlikely also not to happen. But I mean, we need to look at the relationship between China and Africa on a longer term basis, because I mean the Chinese have been very supportive of different projects across the continent, infrastructure wise. But having said that, we are also pushing a lot of environmental protection, and also taking climate action from both China, the US, and other developed countries into our continent. So no one is left off the hook.
Yeah.
In terms of the relationship, of course, the US also has been striking, a lot of deals with African countries. Most recently, there was the US Africa Trade and Investment Arrangement. The bilateral relationships are likely to continue, because also Africa has been benefiting from the US in terms of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which is meant to be renewed. Not sure whether the new administration will renew that. So there is quite a lot of relationships and interest with the African continent, from China to Europe to US and other, bilateral donors. So it's likely to continue. The continent is likely to be a battleground for these relationships, and we keep our eyes on the ball and see how best can we benefit as a continent.
Absolutely. And we just continue on this Trump thing because if eventually he withdraws from the Paris Agreement, then China will not have to do much to be seen as a climate leader. And that one we know. And as the more responsible global power when it comes to tackling climate change. And when you look at this, I know you have mentioned bits of it, what it will do to the African countries in terms of adaptation and maybe renewable energy. And we know that the Chinese are very heavily involved in climate change, including energy generation and agriculture. But if Trump withdraws, what is the impact on China's image as the climate leader?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question directly, if in a scenario where the U.S. administration under Trump withdraws from the Paris Agreement, definitely it will have a ripple effect, especially on the Chinese, green products that renewable energy products that they have been producing over the years. They're likely to attract high tariffs in different markets, and especially the US, if they decide to raise the tariffs for EV batteries and other Chinese technologies on green energy. So that slows down the ambition of the world to move into a more less carbon intensive pathway, and it also slows down the transition to renewable energy. That will have very huge significant impact. So definitely, that's a scenario that's likely to happen. Of course, it's happened in terms of other markets like the European Union setting up high tariffs for Chinese, green products. That's quite unfortunate. So we need to see more support and more incentives towards not just the Chinese technologies that are pushing for renewable energy, but any other technologies that are going to support just energy transition into renewable energy. Yeah. So that's a likely scenario.
All right. Now, given China's objection to discussing debt at COP29, what do you think are the implications for our African countries, Kenya included, because we have a lot of Chinese activity here, and also, the indebtedness to China? And could this position create pressure on bilateral negotiations or climate finance commitments?
Yeah, most definitely. Most African countries are facing high debt distress from the last couple of decades from very many sources within the global financial lending uh, system. And so there's quite a challenge in terms of balancing between repaying your debts and also addressing the climate impacts for the African countries and the African continent. Which, if you look at different reports that have been produced, they are showing that over the years and even in the coming years, the cost of adaptation and building resilience in Africa will still continue rising because, of course, they get their financing from very expensive markets where there's high interest rates, high cost of capital. So all this has a ripple effect on the repayment of the same debts. So, having said that, African countries and I'm saying, African countries as a whole, through the African Group, should be pushing for more grant-based financing. And grant-based financing in the sense that they are getting, you know, grants that are able to address the climate action and also be able to, fundamentally meet the, these costs that are rising due to the impact of the climate crisis. So that's one. The other point that I could stress is around, stabilizing the economy. Those countries have to really, stabilize the economies at the same time address, the high repayment uh, for the external debt they have within their own countries. So that's a very delicate balance from very many countries. And you've mentioned a country like Kenya that has a lot of debt, external debt. So to avoid a debt default or, facing a backlash from the lenders, I think, having a lot of grants to address climate finance, puts less burden to these countries. And even, to be more ambitious, the climate debt is a real debt. And countries have been asking for the
Yeah.
cancellation of the same. Debt, climate-related debts and also other debts, so that they can be able to survive the turmoil. Yeah.
Yeah. Building on what you have just said, how then can African countries leverage partnerships with China to ensure a just and sustainable energy transition while also navigating these global climate commitments?
Yeah, I didn't get the first part of the question, but let me just contextualize what you've just said in terms of investments in renewable energy. During the COP28 in Dubai last year, there was a commitment to triple renewable energy and also double the efficiency. So that's a commitment that countries have made already. Political will is lacking in terms of implementation. So the African countries should be
Yeah.
looking at how do they position themselves to be a destination of investments for renewable energy technologies. So, having said that,
Yeah.
of course, renewable energy investments are still quite expensive for African countries to afford. So, they will be looking at financial flows towards, those investments in renewable energy, be it from China, from the EU, from US, and other bilateral donors that have an interest in investing and supporting the African countries meet the renewable energy potential. And what's the ultimate goal? Energy access is the ultimate goal. Because if you look at the statistics, over 600 million Africans have no access to energy. So, how do you bridge that deficit while at the same time investing in renewable energy sources? So, that's important to consider. Secondly, is that how do countries also able to get the necessary technologies because the resources for renewable energy already exist in the African continent. And how do you get that technology to actually jumpstart, but also invest and generate renewable energy? So that's a very important question, and that's where countries like China come in with their technology to invest in renewable energy and not actually fossil fuel that we are saying no to as a continent. Yeah.
Is there a likelihood that African countries will finally get the financing they've been waiting for, including the loss and damage fund, which have been delayed? And do you think China can influence the disbursement of these funds to the friendly countries in Africa?
Yeah, it's early days to tell the how the outcome will unfold in the coming days, but it's important to note that financing for climate action for the continent of Africa is very urgent, and it should be done at scale and speed. And there are a couple of other options that are available. Getting the loss and damage fund, commitments into that fund. Going back from the COP in Glasgow, the COP in Sharm el Sheikh, and the COP in Dubai, all these COPs have been, asking for financing of the loss and damage. But the most important element is to ensure that, there is a sub goal in the new collective and quantified goal on finance on loss and damage. And that's also an area of contention within the negotiation, spaces. So how do African countries ensure that they push for a sub goal into uh, a sub goal on loss and damage into the new collective and quantified goals? That's a very important priority for the African countries. And where can China also support the African countries on this? You know, being part of G77 plus China, we need to see a lot of solidarity from the Chinese in terms of supporting the African position in the negotiation front. And this support is something we are asking them to also put and also put pressure on the developed countries to actualize a finance goal and ensure that the contributions that are made by countries and commitments are actualized. And we need to track progress of where are we in terms of the finances and where is the money going, so that at least African countries are able to benefit from these funds, and it doesn't just become another empty promise that has no tangible results. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Fred, the Pan African political strategist at Greenpeace Africa. Njeru, or Fred, is an international trade and economic governance and climate change negotiator, and also an energy access and policy researcher. So, thank you so much, Njeru. And like I have said, and I mentioned in our conversation with Njeru, China's Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang revealed today that since 2016, China has provided and mobilized $24.5 billion to assist developing countries in tackling climate change. This figure marks the first time the Chinese government has publicly quantified its global climate finance contributions. And amid the backdrop of the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, which is very looming, this announcement strengthens China's image as a responsible global leader in climate action. And by specifying its financial contributions, China is poised to facilitate discussions and seek compromises on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance at COP29. And moreover, this move could increase pressure on other developed nations to elevate their climate finance commitments. This despite ranking sixth, that is China, behind Japan, Germany, France, the US, and the UK in climate finance contributions. More transparency is needed to fully understand the effectiveness and impact of China's support. Well, again, my name is Njenga Hakina, the Africa Climate Editor at China Global South Project. I hope to be speaking and sharing some more as we continue from the COP. Is Fred Njehu. Thank you so much. Do have a wonderful day and see you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me, and we'll keep in touch as we assess the progress of the COP negotiations. Thank you so much.